welcome to another edition of the Mainframe Book Club. I have with me today Anthony. Anthony, would you like to tell everyone who you are and a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name's Anthony. I run Live Silver Consulting, which is an independent consultancy for cybersecurity litigation, e-discovery, e-disclosure, GDPR analysis. And essentially what we do is we automate legal tech products, but predominantly I've worked on the Post Office IT Horizon scandal.
Yeah, and I think today's going to be a very interesting chat. We'll hopefully learn a little bit more about your role, and more importantly, what happens when projects go wrong and what the human impact can be of this. So I think today should be a very interesting conversation. I guess the first question I should ask is, how did you get into your role? What was the progression for you, and how did you arrive where you are now?
So essentially, I was at university, I did a computer science degree, learned the fundamentals of computer programming, and then I went on to do in my educational background, I went on to do a cybersecurity technology master's degree at an NCSC-backed cybersecurity organization that is backed by the National Cybersecurity Centre. So we learned the fundamentals of essentially data breaches, that sort of thing. And then I went on to do some legal studies, and I'm currently pursuing my PhD, hopefully at Oxford University in law.
Nice. My cousin's looking to go there as well. So I've been to Oxford on a tour. I know it's very nice. And I've seen Morse as well. I know it's very, very picturesque. So I know from when we spoke before, you've worked on some really big cases. Could you tell me something about them, what you've worked on and what you found?
So I've worked within the government legal department on the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry as a senior manager. So I was involved in some of the disclosure obligations around Rule 9 disclosure to various third parties. I worked on a system called Relativity, which essentially is a way of organizing the evidence involved. So that was a bit about my role.
Interesting.
Now, also, I have worked for a confidential third party in regards to the post office inquiry. I also have worked with that case. I understand that inquiry. I understand the human impacts of what had happened. I know it back to front. I also have worked some other matters in the US and the UK privately in terms of e-discovery and e-disclosure. And I've also worked on, I also work for a US law firm at the moment.
I think what would be interesting is one of the big problems we have in the mainframe is we seem to sort of assume that every project we touch is a success and everything we work on is always going to work well and there's never any problems. So I know the post office, it was a huge scandal. It went horribly wrong. There was a lot of human fallout from this. Can you just give us a little bit about what you saw and what your thoughts are? Anything that we could do differently to improve?
There needs to be some accountability and oversight in terms of development. I know this was in the early 1990s when these faults occurred. But I think from the top level, there needs to be when something goes wrong, there needs to be accountability in terms of ensuring that those things are relayed at the very, very first point of something going wrong. In the future, from the top level, there needs to be some sort of management. I haven't got any creative sort of ideas of where I could say this is exactly where it should happen, but there needs to be some accountability and some management in terms of bugs within certain systems being reported if something does occur, because otherwise down the line you see what happens. It wrecks people's lives, it causes huge untold damage to communities in terms of what has happened, and I think it's just very important that management is always having oversight and accountability. I personally wouldn't say, oh, this is what you should implement, but that's what I believe.
Yeah, we're looking at something like steering groups, oversight, all sorts of, there's lots of different things you could
Yeah,
put in place there. But yeah, you've touched on some really interesting points because this is a scandal from the 1990s, but we're
yeah,
rushing headfirst with AI. And it's easy to see how we could maybe repeat this because of a lack of governance and how the importance of being able to report issues in a system. This is something that I think may come out as we go forward. So I think all the points you've raised now could be equally valid in the next 5 years, and we should be looking at them now. So these are all points that we can learn from. As they say, history is something that you learn from. So these are very interesting points that we can build upon and take forward.
yes, yeah,
Um, I read something that was really shocking is that when we're talking about the human impact from the post office scandal,
yeah.
the impact was so bad that and the stress was so bad and the false charges were so bad. Some postmasters faced bankruptcy. There was cases of unfortunately suicide. So it's been a horrible, horrible social cost when these projects have gone wrong at the post office. And this is the human element that people are not aware of. Um, and that sort of brings me on to, I guess people outside of the UK may not know of the post office scandal, just how big it's been in the UK. I mean, we turned it into a TV documentary series. It It ran for 8 parts. It's probably going to be shown around the world at some point as an example of how you can get a project so wrong. And I think the human impact, the sheer lack of accountability, everything you've mentioned so far, these are all things that people can learn from and should be adopting. When a project goes wrong, it's not just that the computer's gone wrong, there's an end user. And this is the bit that we never talk about. You never hear people say, oh, there's any impact in terms of when these things go wrong. And this is what we've seen from the post office. I know, as this was such a big kind of scenario and a big issue that happened, has there been any issues that you've taken and learned from, or anything that you feel other people should learn apart from the oversight? Is there anything else you feel that we should just learn from? Is there anything that you feel, just in terms of a corporate culture, anything that you feel we should do differently?
I think there should be better whistleblowing provisions within government, within the public sector space, within private sector, in order to allow these kind of issues to be raised anonymously, maybe, so that obviously these things do not occur, especially the post office, which, in my view, is the biggest litigation case that's ever happened in the history of British legal history. The reason why I say this is because of the human impact, the amount of catastrophic effect to people's lives. It was just an absolutely troubling and very upsetting thing to obviously be involved in, to see how many people's lives were impacted by something that occurred. I think there should be better provisions for whistleblowing and ensuring that people who know about certain things can submit their knowledge about certain things more honestly. So there might potentially could be legislation. I know legislation has been brought in terms of the Hillsborough Law, which
Mm-hmm.
brings more accountability in terms of people being able to report this and makes public officials more relevant. So that was a very good piece of legislation that was passed just recently by the government of the UK, which allows for people to be more accountable. So that's the first step. Hopefully that gets passed in the Lords and goes to the King's consent, and that gets passed into absolute law. But yeah, just essentially, I just believe that there should be better provisions for whistleblowing. There should definitely be some sort of organization rather than a small organization such as the Serious Fraud Office that is
Yeah.
involved in oversight of corruption and things like that at the first instance, that people can report these issues to a higher authority if they do come across these, because otherwise you see down the line, maybe 26, 30 years later, you see the catastrophic impact, and obviously based on the news that there's been just not just one system, there's been multiple systems that have been having bugs.
I'm just going to put it out there because people may not realize this in the UK. The Serious Fraud Office, we've all heard of it and it tackles major cases, but
Yeah,
every year they only take on about 6 cases per year. I was talking to the head of
yes.
the SFO and I was shocked when he told me that information. I was like, wow, six. So all of the fraud that takes place and they can only handle 6 cases per year. And they're under budgetary pressure as well.
Don't think the Serious Fraud Office has the capabilities or the budgeting to enable it to be able to investigate some of the things that do occur, because it doesn't get enough, funding. But that's not within my remit to essentially
Mhm.
discuss. But I just think within private sector organizations, within the public sector, if these sort of things can be reported in a much more streamlined manner and it can be reported anonymously, then you get to a situation where things do not occur further down the line. I know this is more under review in terms of it's ongoing in terms of the outcome to the inquiry report. So delving into too much information there probably wouldn't be so dramatic. But yes, I do believe that that's my idea of how these things can be stopped at the beginning, in terms of a mainframe, in terms of a computer, in terms of identifying bugs quicker. And so combining bugs with accountability, therefore you don't get these issues further down the line, and you have anonymous whistleblowing, which should be litigated or legislated across all private sector organizations, in my view. Better public whistleblowing protections, uh, but that's from my own reading up on that.
No, and I think one thing I would mention here, because I've obviously been to Parliament and spoke on this, is that I feel that culturally we need a change in attitude around whistleblowing. Because so often when whistleblowers try and make their point or try to raise issues, they're not heard, they're not listened to. And a cultural change. I mean, the post office, we're looking at costs at the moment, I've seen figures of around £2 billion. Whereas if the whistleblowers had been listened to right at the start with the problems of the system and they'd have acted on it, the actual cost, the time, the human impact, the economics of the situation, everything would have been significantly improved. So it's almost like we need a cultural change. And I know today we're not talking about whistleblowing, but it's an issue there that I feel there's a cultural change that needs to happen within large corporations to embrace the concept of whistleblowing, introduce anonymous whistleblowing, as you say. Um, I guess the last question for me, because we've touched on a number of things, when you're doing what you do, um, would you say that in order to do what you do, you would need to follow your path? Would someone, if someone is sitting here and they're a skilled mainframe programmer or application programmer or security consultant on the mainframe, would they need to still go away and train legally, or would they be able to apply to someone like you for opportunities? What would be a career path if someone wanted to go into? Because I think it's quite an interesting field that you're in. Is there a sort of a career map?
Yes. So there's no particular career map. I essentially was always very interested in computers, binary, that sort of thing. So I combined my legal, cyber, and computer skills into one area essentially.
Hmm.
And so I've now created a range of services and products that allow the products are more in development, but the services allow for things like automated outcomes to cases, legal cases, e-discovery, things like importing mass evidence into a quantum computer and then being able to, a mainframe or a quantum computer and allowing it to basically delve into the evidence basis. And that
Hmm.
goes back to obviously things like big inquiries or big litigation cases. It allows it to compute the outcome to a case, telling you whether or not it's basically winnable by dialing out an output. So that's essentially the career path that I've developed. And I use my cyber skills to essentially prevent data breaches to the legal industry, to law firms, things like that. So if someone wants to go down that career path, I think it's very important that you start with a computer background, do a bit of cyber, do a bit of legal, and then see where you go. It's a very niche area.
It's really interesting you mentioned data breaches, because one of the big areas that everyone always pays attention to is there's a report from IBM, which is a cost of data breach report that gets published, and everyone gets very interested in the findings that come out year on year. So to hear you link your role to data breaches and to the issues that you've discussed, I think makes it a very interesting challenge, and it's something that I think people should look at, be aware of, and obviously, if they feel they need you, come to you for your services.
Yeah, so I predominantly deal with the legal industry in terms of preventing data breaches to their litigation, whether or not it be geopolitical or just a hack, essentially. Divulging onto what's recently been in the news, such as the Transport for London data breach, where cryptocurrency involved. It's a massive area. I mean, you could go on to, it's becoming cyber weapons. It's becoming a humongous
Hmm.
situation. You've got the Trump's election cyber breaches to
Yeah.
actual election polling booths. Now they're saying have actually been hacked. So I think that it's very important to divulging back to that. I think that in terms of our services, we just provide the best cybersecurity services we can to legal law firms, essentially to prevent any data breaches from competing law firms or from malicious actors, whether it be in hostile nations or someone who's trying to access their litigation for malfeasance purposes.
Well, I'm going to end with one last question. Is there anything else that you wish to say, or any other questions that I should ask you? Because I feel sometimes the best interviews are the ones that are short, crisp, and carry all the information straight away. So is there anything else that you feel I could have asked that I haven't? Anything else you'd like to tell me?
No, there's nothing else. I thank you for meeting with me today. And yeah, if anyone out there wants to check out our website, it's Live Silver Consulting.
Yeah, thank you. Anthony, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.